Welcome back to our AI in Action Building with Copilot Studio series. In this video, we'll cover user authentication for plugin actions. A while back, there was only the option to have maker authentication. But since a couple of months, we are able to perform actions on behalf of the logged in user. This is way better from a security perspective. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Here we are in the Copilot I just created. The Copilot is called My Profile Copilot. And to show you how user authentication works with actions, let's go to the Actions section and create a new action. Here, we're going to search for an action. So I'm going to select Get My Profile V2, and I'm going to hit Enter to search for it. Here, when I scroll down a little bit, I can select Get My Profile V2 from Office 365 users. When I select that, it will go into the Configure Actions section. And what I can do here is I can select the end user authentication of this action, and I can select a connection. And this connection, you can see that right here. When you click on user authentication, which is the default of end user authentication, you can also switch to Copilot Author authentication. The Copilot Author authentication used to be the default for actions in Copilot Studio. The user authentication has been added a couple months back at build. The difference between these two is that user authentication will require the user of your Copilot to authenticate with the connection that you need. So, for instance, when you are using Office 365 users as a connector and the Get My Profile action, you need to authenticate the user with the Office 365 users connector. When you use the Copilot Author authentication, it will use the connection that is displayed below. So you can see that connection, and it will use that for every action that you have for that connector. That means that sometimes you want to have an action that will maybe get files in a SharePoint library or something like that. Usually, you want to make sure that the user that is using your Copilot can only find the items that that user has access to. In that case, you really want to use user authentication. So in this case, we are going to use user authentication. I'm going to hit next to go to the next screen here. I can select inputs and outputs. The inputs are 0 in this case, so there is no input for this action. The outputs are 31, and that's a lot. But I'm going to show you a little bit more here. I'm going to click on Edit Outputs. When I scroll down below all the different outputs that we have, I have an option to tick the box in front of Respond to a user after running this action. And what this does, it will display information after this action has been run. And what it will do, it will dynamically generate a message by AI based on the output of this action. I also have the option to change this to something else. I can, for instance, use you create a message, and that is when I need to, for instance, create my own message. Or when I create an adaptive card, then I have to create the adaptive card for it. In this case, I'm going to use the dynamically generates a message option. Next, I'm going to hit save to save the outputs, and I'm going to hit next and finish to save the action. This will take a couple of seconds before it's saved. And then we have to do one more step. At the top, you can see a little banner, and that says, enable your Copilot to respond with the best combination of actions and topics using generative AI preview. This means that whenever I create an action and I leave it like this, it will not trigger that action. I always need to create a topic on top of that, and then that topic should trigger my action to make sure that we can trigger the action. When I go to generative AI and I change the setting here to generative and I hit save, it will change the behavior. because in this case, when I hit the X, I can test out my Copilot and I can ask a question. For instance, get my profile. And when I hit send, it will trigger the action we just created. And here we already see the effect of the user authentication, because here I can see a message that additional permissions are required to run this action. To proceed, please select connect and review any missing connections. When I hit the connect button, it will open a new tab. And here I can see which connections are missing. And in this case, we can see that there is an Office 365 users connector and it only uses one action. And when I click on it, it will say get my profile. And that's the one we selected when we created our action. And I can hit connect here. When I do that, it will create a connection for me as a user and I can hit submit. Next, it will load for a little while and it will say the status is connected now. So I'm going to close down this tab and I'm going to retry by clicking the retry button. When I do that, it will run the action again. And now it will get all the details of my user profile. And that's how user authentication in actions work. If you want to know more about authentication for the actions, make sure to go to the link below. Thanks for watching and make sure to subscribe to the Microsoft Power Platform channel to receive a notification of when the next episode in our AI in Action Building with Copilot Studio series is posted.